The Self-Addiction Protocol: How to Become Psychologically Untouchable Using Carl Jung's Forbidden Framework. Part 1. The diagnosis: you're not tired of people. You're tired of disappearing. Every room you walk into, you make yourself smaller. Every relationship you pour yourself into, you walk away emptier. Every morning you wake up, your first instinct isn't to check your own state of mind. It's to check your phone, to see who noticed you, who responded, who remembered you existed. And when the screen is empty, something inside you quietly collapses. You've been telling yourself this is normal, that caring about what people think is just being human, that adjusting yourself to fit other people's comfort zones is just being mature, that swallowing your needs to keep the peace is just being kind. But here's what no one is telling you: you are not being kind. You are bleeding out, slowly, silently, in plain sight. And the most terrifying part: the people you're bleeding for aren't even watching. They're not evil, they're not malicious. They're simply doing what all living things do when something offers itself freely. They're consuming it without guilt, without awareness, without gratitude, because that's what humans do with resources that cost them nothing. You made yourself cheap, and the world priced you accordingly. Now you're sitting here, exhausted, overlooked, quietly furious, wondering what you're doing wrong, wondering why the more you give, the less you receive. Wondering why the harder you try to be needed, the more invisible you become. The answer is not what you think. The problem is not that you care too much. The problem is that you have redirected every ounce of your psychological power, your attention, your obsession, your life force outward, into people, into their opinions, into their moods, into their approval. And in doing so, you have starved the one entity that was supposed to be running this entire operation: you. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who cracked the deepest codes of the human psyche, identified this condition over a century ago. He didn't call it low self-esteem. He didn't call it people-pleasing. He gave it a far more precise and far more disturbing name. He called it participation mystique, a primitive psychological state in which you lose the boundary between yourself and others, where you cannot tell where you end and another person begins, where your emotional weather system is entirely controlled by external forces: a text message, a facial expression, a tone of voice, a moment of silence that you spend 3 hours trying to decode. You think you are loving these people. You think you are being generous. Jung would tell you the truth: you are not loving them. You are fused with them, and fusion is not love. Fusion is the annihilation of self. And until you understand that distinction at the cellular level, until it burns itself into the architecture of your identity, you will keep repeating the same cycle. You will keep finding new people to disappear into, new approval to chase, new versions of the same exhaustion. But today, that cycle ends, because what I'm about to show you is not a motivational framework. It is not a list of tips. It is a complete psychological rewiring. A process that Jung himself went through, not in theory, but in the fire of his own psychological collapse. A process that will require you to do something that every social instinct you have will fight against with everything it has. You are going to stop reaching outward, and you are going to collapse deliberately, ruthlessly, completely, inward. Part 2. The law of gravity. Before we go any further, you need to understand one brutal law of human dynamics. A law that operates underneath every relationship, every social interaction, every power structure you have ever been part of. People are not attracted to generosity. They are attracted to gravity. Read that again. Let it land. Think about the people in your life or in the world who command rooms, who attract loyalty effortlessly, who seem to have people orbiting them without ever reaching out, without ever performing, without ever begging. You've seen them. You've felt the pull of them. And you've probably told yourself they were just lucky or charismatic or born with some quality you don't have. You were wrong. They have mass, psychological density, a concentrated internal weight that creates a gravitational field around them. And people, all people, whether they realize it or not, are drawn to density. Now look at yourself. When you want someone to like you, what do? You reach out. You accommodate. You adjust your opinions, your tone, your personality to match what you think they want. You scatter your energy in every direction, trying to make contact, trying to make an impression, trying to matter. You know what that makes you in psychological terms: a vapor. You have no weight. You have no density. A single critical comment can destabilize your entire sense of self. A single day of silence from someone you care about can send you into a spiral of analysis and anxiety that consumes hours of your life. You cannot generate gravity when your energy is dispersed. Physics doesn't allow it, and neither does human psychology. The people who control rooms, the ones who command respect simply by existing in a space, have done something that most humans are too terrified to do. They have collapsed inward. They have taken every ounce of their psychological energy and directed it toward one singular obsession, themselves, not in a shallow, superficial way, not in the way of a person who posts carefully filtered images to harvest compliments. That's not self-obsession. That's just a more sophisticated form of begging for external validation. True psychological density comes from a different source entirely. It comes from the ruthless, relentless, almost clinical exploration of your own interior world. Your fears, your shadows, your drives, your contradictions, your buried power. When you are that deeply rooted in your own existence, when your internal world is so rich, so complex, so consuming that it genuinely competes with the external world for your attention, something shifts. You stop being a vapor, you become a star. And stars don't chase planets. Planets orbit stars, part 3. The shadow. Now we go deeper. Because everything I've told you so far is the surface layer, the infrastructure. The real transformation happens in a place most people refuse to enter. Jung called it the shadow. The shadow is not your weakness. Let me be precise about this because most people misunderstand it completely. The shadow is not your insecurity or your sadness or your fear. Those are just wounds. The shadow is something far more powerful and far more dangerous. The shadow is everything you have been taught to amputate about yourself, your anger, your selfishness, your capacity for cruelty, your ruthlessness, your arrogance, your hunger, your darkness. From the moment you were old enough to understand social rules, you were trained to cut these parts off, to hide them, to be ashamed of them, to perform the acceptable, sanitized, palatable version of yourself that society would reward with approval and belonging. And so you did. You became a performer. You built a mask, Jung called it the persona, and you wore it so consistently, for so long, that you eventually forgot it was a mask. You started to believe that the performance was the person. But here is the secret that Jung uncovered, the one that changes everything. When you cut off your shadow, you do not destroy it. You give it autonomy. The parts of yourself you refuse to acknowledge don't disappear. They go underground. They operate beneath your conscious awareness, driving your behavior from the basement of your psyche. Your suppressed rage becomes passive aggression. Your denied selfishness becomes martyrdom with resentment underneath. Your buried ambition becomes bitterness toward people who are living the life you secretly want. And most devastatingly, your shadow becomes the lens through which you see other people. Because you cannot tolerate these traits in yourself, you become hypersensitive to them in others. You project your own darkness outward. You see your own denied qualities in the people around you, and you react to them with disproportionate fury, because what you're actually reacting to is yourself. This is why you can be triggered by a stranger's confidence. This is why certain people make your skin crawl in ways you cannot logically explain. This is why you find yourself in the same toxic patterns with different people over and over again. You keep casting the same actor in different bodies because you keep projecting the same unintegrated material. And here is the most important part of all of this. Your shadow is where your power lives. Robert Johnson, one of the most respected Jungian analysts of the 20th century, said it plainly. The shadow contains pure, unrefined gold. Your capacity for ruthlessness is exactly what allows you to hold a boundary that cannot be broken. Your selfishness is exactly what protects your time and your energy from people who would consume them without reciprocating. Your arrogance, the part of you that knows deep down that you are capable of extraordinary things, is the psychological shield that deflects the crowd's judgment. The traits you are most ashamed of are your most powerful assets, but only if you stop running from them and start integrating them. So how do you integrate the shadow? How do you actually do this? Jung showed us the way in the most dramatic fashion possible. In 1913, after severing his relationship with Freud, which we'll come back to, Jung entered the most terrifying period of his life. He was hearing voices. He was experiencing visions so vivid and disturbing that he genuinely questioned his own sanity. He was fragmenting from the inside. Most men in that position would have run, would have sought comfort, distraction, numbing, would have done anything to silence the noise in their head. Jung did the opposite. He locked the door of his study, sat at his desk, and opened a direct, conscious, deliberate conversation with his own madness. He wrote it all down. He drew it. He engaged with the figures and voices and visions as if they were real entities with something to tell him. He asked them questions. He listened to their answers. He sat in the darkness and refused to look away. The result of that process, years of sustained, unflinching engagement with his own shadow, became the Red Book, one of the most extraordinary documents in the history of human psychology. A manual of psychological self-creation, written in real time by a man who was simultaneously dismantling and rebuilding himself from the inside out. This is what shadow integration actually looks like in practice. You feel intense jealousy when a peer succeeds. Don't suppress it. Don't perform the "I'm so happy for them" that your social conditioning demands. Instead, trap the jealousy. Pin it under a microscope. Ask it, what specifically is it about their success that triggers this reaction? What does it reveal about what you want and have been afraid to pursue? What does it tell you about the story you've been telling yourself about what's possible for you? You feel the impulse to manipulate a situation in your favor. Don't immediately judge yourself for it. Watch yourself instead. Study the mechanics of your own instinct. What need is it serving? What fear is it protecting? What does it reveal about where you feel powerless? This is not permission to become cruel. This is the precise opposite of cruelty, because the person who has never examined their own capacity for darkness is the most dangerous person in any room. They act on their shadow without awareness, without choice, without accountability. The person who has sat with their shadow, studied it, integrated it, they have something infinitely more powerful than innocence. They have self-knowledge. And self-knowledge is the foundation of everything that follows. Part 4. The reclamation. Now I need to introduce you to a concept that will permanently change the way you think about your attention, your energy, and your relationships. Jung used the word libido not in the Freudian sexual sense, but in a broader, more profound sense. He meant psychic energy, life force, the raw fuel that powers your desires, your focus, your will, and your capacity for action. And right now, your libido is hemorrhaging. It is leaking out of you in 100 directions simultaneously. It's hooked into the job that's slowly killing your soul, but that you're too afraid to leave. It's tangled up in the ex who ended things 6 months ago, but who you're still replaying conversations with at 2 in the morning. It's bleeding into the friend group that entertains you on weekends, but quietly mocks your ambitions. It's draining into the societal expectations that dictate what success looks like, what a good life looks like, what a good person looks like, expectations that have nothing to do with who you actually are or what you actually want. You are running on empty because you have given everyone else the keys to your fuel tank. Jung identified a process he called libido retraction. The systematic, deliberate, sometimes brutal act of hunting down every external attachment that is draining your psychic energy and pulling it back, not passively, not politely, not gradually, violently, completely, without apology. Let me be specific about what this means in practice. When someone insults you and you spend the next 3 days obsessing over what they said, replaying it, constructing elaborate responses in your head, cycling through anger and hurt and humiliation, they are not just living rent-free in your mind. They are burning your fuel. They are using your psychic energy to power their own memory in your skull. Libido retraction means you notice that obsession the moment it starts, and you make a deliberate, forceful choice. You snap the tether. You pull the hook out. You take that exact volume of emotional energy, all that rage, all that hurt, all that activated electricity, and you redirect it completely into something that belongs to you. You take the anger and you use it to train harder than you've ever trained. You take the anxiety and you channel it into the relentless execution of something you've been putting off for months. You take the humiliation and you convert it into the kind of focused, cold, sustained effort that produces results that will eventually make the insult irrelevant. You become, as Jung described it, an alchemical furnace. In the ancient practice of alchemy, the transformation of base metals into gold did not happen in the open air. It happened in a sealed vessel, an athanor subjected to sustained, concentrated heat. The sealing was not incidental. It was the entire mechanism. Without the seal, the heat dissipated. Without the heat, there was no transformation. Your mind is the vessel. The sealing is the act of libido retraction. And this means closing every valve through which your psychic energy is currently escaping. Stop announcing your plans to people who are secretly hoping you fail. Stop performing your pain in front of an audience that is more entertained than empathetic. Stop seeking direction from people whose own lives are evidence that they have no idea where they're going. Stop outsourcing your emotional regulation to anyone whose stability you cannot verify. Close the valves. When you do this, when you genuinely stop leaking, something uncomfortable happens. The internal pressure builds. The psychic heat rises. It will feel like anxiety. It will feel like isolation. You will have a desperate, almost physical urge to reach out, to text someone, to post something, to perform your existence for an audience, to release the pressure through the familiar channels of external validation. Don't let it burn. That discomfort, that heat, is not a signal that something is wrong. It is the sensation of transformation. It is the feeling of a fragmented, dispersed, scattered ego being melted down and reforged into something solid, something with mass, something with gravity. The people who have been through this process describe the other side in almost identical terms. A sharpness that wasn't there before. A clarity of thought that feels almost unfair compared to what came before it. A physical energy that they had forgotten was possible. Because, for the first time in years, possibly in their entire adult lives, they are running on 100% of their own power instead of perpetually diverting it to the endless maintenance of external relationships and external approval. Your first thought in the morning stops being about who hasn't texted you back. It becomes a ruthless, clear-eyed assessment of where you are and what you're going to do today to advance your own reality. A project fails, data. A relationship ends, data. An opportunity collapses, data. You process it. You extract the lesson. You adjust the strategy. You move. You are no longer devastated by the world because you are no longer entangled with it. You are a sovereign state. And sovereign states do not beg for recognition. They simply exist at full power and let the consequences speak. Part 5. The severance. Now I have to tell you the part that no one wants to hear. The part that sounds inspiring in theory and feels like psychological death in practice. You cannot do any of what I've described while maintaining the structures that are currently feeding your dependence on external validation. There is something in your life right now, possibly several somethings, that is functioning as what I'll call a false scaffold. It is a relationship, a career, a social group, an identity, an ideology, something external that provides the illusion of structure and meaning while simultaneously preventing you from building anything real inside yourself. You know exactly what it is. You've known for a long time. It might be the relationship you stay in not because it feeds you, but because leaving it would require you to face yourself without a mirror. It might be the friend group that keeps you comfortable and small, that entertains you just enough that you never feel the full weight of your own unrealized potential. It might be the career that your family is proud of, but that you experience as a slow suffocation of everything you actually are. It might be the social media presence you maintain, the performance of a life that is more curated than lived, because the validation it produces is the only